There have been so many new exciting lenses that have been coming out over the past 2 years, and I feel like the lenses are getting wider and wider. Last year, Viltrox made the incredible 16mm f1.8, a budget-friendly but yet incredibly well-performing wide-angled lens. And then this year, Laowa came out with the 10mm f2.8 autofocus lens, the widest autofocus lens we've ever seen. In that time, I feel like telephoto lenses haven't gotten enough attention. What they can do, how they can change your photos and videos, and whether or not you need one. Let's start with who needs a 70 to 200mm lens? Who's it for? Well, it's all about adding reach and compression. Let's start with portrait photography. If you shoot people with cameras, then a 70 to 200mm lens is probably gonna be your second most used lens. Reach isn't usually a big issue when it comes to portrait photography and taking photos of people, which is why portrait photographers like myself love using focal lengths like 35mm and 50mm, because it is a good perspective of the human face, but also at the same time provides a lot of that background context of where your subject is in the environment, making them great environmental portraits. But what those focal lengths lack is compression. The further you zoom in and step away from your subject, while your subject remains the same size, the background gets bigger and fills the frame much more. This is fantastic for subject isolation when the focus of the photo is really just the person you're photographing, which is what makes 70 to 200 such a good focal range for portrait photography, especially for headshots. What about travel photography? Well, whether it's for leisure or you're trying to get photos and videos for work, a 70 to 200 is surprisingly useful. Yes, it's a bit heavy to lug around with you everywhere, but on our recent trip to London and Santorini, the 70 to 200 really allowed me to get some interesting and compelling shots that would have been otherwise maybe kind of boring and bland. Take this lighthouse in Santorini, for example. The photo looks good on an ultra wide, but how do I take a photo where both the lighthouse and the subject is equally sized in the frame? Well, to do that, I had Annette walk 30 feet away from the lighthouse, then I walked another 30 feet away from her, and then zoomed in on the 70 to 200. Now I can get a photo where both the subject and the background are equally dominant and filling the frame, with everything else kind of disappearing. Wildlife photography. This is a mixed bag. Yes, telephoto lenses are obviously good for wildlife, but 200mm on the most zoomed in end of a 70 to 200 is actually sometimes, a lot of the times, not gonna be enough. Ideally, for wildlife photography, you're really gonna want something closer to 400mm or 600mm. But what's nice about this 70 to 200mm focal length is that it's kind of a Swiss Army knife of lens focal lengths. It's good for portrait photography, as we've talked about, and when zoomed in, you can get a decent amount of reach, but you can add something like a 2x teleconverter that Sony sells to now change that focal length to 140 to 400, giving you the reach you need to photograph wildlife. And on a very similar note to wildlife photography, this lens is fantastic for sports photography, depending on what sport you're shooting. If you're able to get close to the action like on the sidelines of a basketball court, a 70 to 200 is probably all that you'll need. But if you're in the stands for something like a football or a football game, then you're not gonna be able to get those super tight shots that you see in like sports news, but you can still get some pretty fantastic shots. And of course, if you want that extra reach, you can just get that 2x teleconverter, and now you have a 400mm lens on the long end. Event photography. Yes, the answer is just yes. If you shoot any kind of events, whether that's weddings or birthdays or corporate seminars, then the 70 to 200 is an absolute must. It lets you stay out of the way from the event that's happening while still being able to zoom in and capture those intimate moments. And with that background compression, it really does make everything feel cinematic and look like a movie. And the last category on my list is gonna be landscape photography. Now, if you're like me, initially my thought was, well, you don't need a telephoto lens for landscape photography, right? Like you really just need like wide-angled lenses to capture those large and scenic vistas. That's what I thought until I watched one of 𝗚𝗘𝗟𝗟𝗢𝗪's most recent videos talking about using a 70 to 200mm lens in landscape photography, because certain compositions just can't be achieved with a wide-angle lens, something like moon photography against a striking background. And if you're into landscape photography, I highly recommend you check out 𝗚𝗘𝗟𝗟𝗢𝗪's channel. He has some amazing work. And while you can zoom with your feet to a certain degree, the focal length of your lens will dictate the perspective of your shot. And I think the best way to show you, and the best way to show you what I've been meaning when I say compression, is with this example. 𝗚𝗛 is framed identically in each of these shots, but as I zoomed in, I stepped further and further away to maintain her being in the same part of the frame. And as you can see, the further I step away from her and the more I zoom in, the more exaggerated and compressed that background becomes. And this specific characteristic is unique to longer telephoto lenses. So if you're looking to buy a 70 to 200mm telephoto lens, which one should you buy? Of course, there's the options from Sony, which I will talk about, but there's also options from Sigma and Tamron. Now, I don't own those lenses myself, so I can't really speak to them, but I definitely recommend looking into reviews of those lenses because I've heard nothing but great things about them. But if you're looking at the Sony 70 to 200 f2.8 G Master Mark I or the Mark II, here's what you need to know. The Sony 70 to 200 f2.8 G Master Mark I is an incredible lens, and it's actually one of the lenses I've owned for the longest period of time. And as a matter of fact, I think it's one of the earliest reviews I've ever made on this channel. It's built well, it's got optical steady shot to stabilize your photos and videos, it's sharp, and it handles artifacts like vignetting, chromatic aberration, and distortion very well. The Mark II? Whew, it's even better. Sony made the lens even sharper, improved on vignette control, and even marginally improved on chromatic aberration. And the most impressive part is that they managed to do this in a smaller form factor and at 30% of the weight. That is a difference you can genuinely feel, especially if you're lugging this lens around with you all day long. And on top of that, Sony has even improved the autofocus in this lens with what they claim to be up to 4 times faster autofocus. If you own the GM Mark I and you're happy with the performance of that lens, then I'd say probably skip the upgrade because it's kind of an expensive one. But if you plan on buying the 70 to 200 and you can see yourself using the lens a lot, honestly, I'd drop the extra $900 and go with the Mark II. I've had my copy of the GM Mark II on loan from B&H Photo, thank you B&H Photo, and I've had so much fun shooting with it that I'm genuinely considering selling my Mark I and upgrading to the Mark II. So I guess ask me in like 6 months to see which lens I own. All right, that's it for this one. If you're interested in any of the lenses I talked about today, links will be in the description down below. And let me know in the comment section down below what you think of the 70 to 200mm focal length. Is it something you shoot on often or not? Why? And as always, I will see you in the next one. Peace.